Mr. Deputy Speaker, this bill has not received a good reception on either side of this House of Commons. A number of honourable members have referred to the impact of the changes on people who suffer, women who suffer domestic violence. And the majority of women who've experienced domestic violence will be ineligible for legal aid under this bill because the evidence that they will be required to present is far too restrictive. Again, because of these proposals, there is likely to be an increase in the number of women being cross-examined by a perpetrator in detail about the physical or sexual violence that she has experienced. And that will mean that a woman who is already a victim will be re-victimised as a result of these proposals. My constituency is one of the most deprived in this country. The latest unemployment figures show that we have 9.7% unemployment. The impact across the spectrum on my constituents of what the government has done in terms of ending health and maternity grants, in terms of ending EMA, in terms of cuts on Sure Start, in terms of tuition fees, in all of those things will mean that life is harder for the people who sent me to Parliament. And this bill is yet another instalment in what the government is doing to the people of the Gorton constituency and the people of Manchester. As compared with 2 years ago, 2 independent advice centres in my city have closed down. Manchester Advice, which had about 100 staff providing advice in welfare rights, housing, consumer affairs and debt, closed in April. All that is left is the Community Legal Advice Service and a couple of solicitors who have a contract for rather less than £3 million over 3 years, but are facing a 10% cut in October. And in any case, none of the specialist work will be funded when the contract expires in 2 years' time. The South Manchester Law Centre in my constituency struggles on with a small immigration contract. And the situation for people with immigration problems in my constituency is such that the law centre may well be destroyed in Manchester, and that is the body to which my constituents have to turn. And that means that more and more they have to turn to the Member of Parliament or pay exorbitant sums to grasping, greedy solicitors. There are now only 2 legal aid immigration providers in Manchester, but within 3 miles of the South Manchester Law Centre there are 50 solicitors' firms and at least the same number of non-solicitors, all anxious to part vulnerable people with their money. On Friday evening I shall have a constituency surgery and people will come to me and tell me of the hundreds of pounds they're being forced to pay because of the lack of adequate free advice which is so essential to them. Mr. Deputy Speaker, again and again and again, this bill is damaging the people who can least survive from the damage. There will be something like £2 million worth of cuts in Manchester in the civil legal aid budget, and approximately 2/3 of these cuts are directed at people who are currently eligible for legal aid. 1/3 will come from remuneration cuts to providers, and they will be expected to do the same work for less money. And all of this affects the same kind of people who are hit by the cuts in public service delivery. The majority of the 6,500 people in our area who have been using the civil legal aid service comes from low-income households. They're predominantly women, predominantly black and minority ethnic people, and sick and disabled people. people with mental health problems and other disabilities experience much higher rates of unemployment, homelessness and discrimination, and they will be disproportionately affected. Again and again, we get examples of the way in which people in my constituency and more widely will be damaged. Welfare benefit is removed completely from legal aid. Employment is removed completely. Debt is another area that will be removed except for cases in which the client's home is at immediate risk. And again, we find that such access as there will be to legal aid will be more difficult. For example, the Community Legal Advice Helpline, with its 0845 prefix, which is very expensive for people to dial. And in addition to that, what people want and need is face-to-face advice. They do not want to ring the number and talk to somebody they will not be able to hear, see, and not be able to assess. What they want is advice from other human beings and who care about them. People with learning disabilities, mental health issues, prefer to have advice in person in order to pick up on non-verbal signals and build the trust necessary to talk about their problems, because people are shy and reluctant and sometimes ashamed to talk about their problems. Women who suffer domestic violence put up with it because they're ashamed to talk about it, ashamed that they got into this predicament. And so what I say, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is this. We're faced with a government who is taking away from people who need it services which the members of the government themselves don't need and have never needed. So they don't understand the damage that they're causing. And so I say to the government, and I say to the many honourable members opposite who have had the decency to get up and talk about their misgivings, let's try to get some improvement in this, because people's lives, well-being, peace of mind, domestic situations all depend upon it. We cannot go on like this, victimising those who are already victims. Yeah.